How can preschool programs prepare ELLs for academic success? Please join me for part 2 of this Colorín Colorado webcast, Preschool for English Language Learners. Hello, I'm Beth Ann Patrick. In the previous segment of this webcast, we discussed English language instruction for young English language learners, or ELLs. In this segment, we'll discuss curriculum and the academic side of the equation. Welcome, Dr. Becky Palacios.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. You've talked about preschool being much more than naps and babysitting. What are the components of a good preschool program?
Well, a great preschool program will have the ability to teach children in a multiple amounts of subjects, to cover them all, from science to reading to social studies, art, music, health, physical education. All those components are very important, and as well as looking at their social and emotional well-being and their physical well-being.
So what should a well-rounded curriculum for young ELLs include?
Well, one of the things that we do in our school is develop all those different subject areas into themes. And so when we look at themes and look at learning over time, one of the best ways that we have found is that if things are organized around a central theme, second language learners, English language learners, are more likely to understand and comprehend the instruction if it's very well organized.
Well, what skills do we want those young ELLs to take with them to kindergarten?
Well, we definitely want to develop really good pre-reading and reading skills with young children. That's one of the basic premises of a well-rounded curriculum, is that everything that you do in your environment, in your teaching, in your strategies, is going to include a literacy middle part, a hub around everything else that you teach. So, for example, if I'm working with a theme that maybe is science, and we're looking at maybe ocean animals, ocean families, then we're going to make sure that those books that we select, those books that we read, are really going to relay a lot of the fiction and nonfiction parts of learning about animals in their native environment, and using a lot of that language, because things that are very real to children can then be included. You can take them to an aquarium, they can look at fish in a small school or classroom aquarium, they can look at animals in their context, and the more that they're immersed in something that's real, the better they're going to acquire that language.
How do we help them, these young ELLs, develop good social and communication skills?
Well, we need to have them practice. You need to pair them up in really good peer learning situations. If you have an English language learner, you pair him off with a strong English language speaker where they can communicate together. And we definitely use all that type of language development that we know is important. As again, they go into kindergarten, we know that we want them to have a lot of phonological awareness, a lot of understanding of the language. And the teacher's not the only model. For them to develop a good academic background, they need to practice the language in context. They need to have good social situations, not just in the classroom, but speakers coming in from the community to help them understand why that language is important out in the real world. Also, parents coming in as language models, because they're very important in the classroom to see, oh, there's my mom or my dad or my grandma coming in and sharing experience in their native language. So we want to use language in a multitude of ways, in a multitude of environments, with many resources and speakers coming in.
So what are the pre-reading skills that we definitely want to have young ELLs exposed to in preschool?
Well, definitely phonological awareness, the understanding of how sounds and letters break up into pieces. We need to have children understand what it means to have syllables in words, and how they can be segmented and clapped out, for lack of a better type of example, where children can understand that sounds make words, and then words make sentences, and sentences make paragraphs, and then stories. So having them understand how the functions of language work, what those letters are, later on talking about, their sounds and how they correspond to one another, and then leading them to really good print-rich environment, just to see what's out in their homes, in their communities, and labeling things and using language just in a really rich context.
Well, speaking of their homes and communities, where does native language fit into reading instruction for a young ELL?
Well, those children that we've found out and we have worked with in our classrooms, those that come in with very strong native language abilities really transfer quickly into that second language learning ability. And the reason I say that is because, for example, we had a child that was just strong Spanish speaker and was able to pick up on the English language learning because he had to learn basically the words that go with the corresponding concepts that he had already developed. So when you have this conceptual understanding and conceptual awareness of what things are in the world, and you transfer those labels into that second language learning, those children just grow so quickly and develop that for us, the English language learning at a much richer level and a much quicker level than children who haven't been read to or talked to or sung to when they were very young.
Well, what are some effective ways to assess the ELL's reading progress throughout the year?
Well, we look at the different types of ongoing assessments that can they clap these things? Can they rhyme? Can they find words in context? Can they circle letters? Can they see these things? So as you use interactive whiteboards, as you use words and pictures labeled together, I played a game where they would cut them up and they'd have to put them back together. We would use scissors and we would cut up the word, and they would have to, for example, if they have the word cat, put it back together in the right order after you've cut it up and put it back together, and then you have the label of the picture that you're labeling, or the actual puppet that was there. Using language and context, assessing them in a multitude of ways. And it's hard for me to give examples because there's so many of them throughout the year that they progress through.
Well, I'm going to give you a chance to give a couple more at least, because I want to know about some of your other favorite reading activities and strategies in the classroom.
Well, there's many. I think just at the very beginning when I would get a book, I would just read it for fun. Just read it for the joy of reading, because one of the main things that we have to instill in children is the motivation to read. What is my purpose to read this book? It's got to be engaging, it's got to be meaningful to him or her. They have to want to read it. So it wasn't just about me selecting books, it was about me having the ability to have a showcase of books and let them choose. I want to read this book, I want to have this book. And then we would read it for the joy, the fun of reading it. And once we did that, we could come back and then take it apart.
You have many cabinets of books in your classroom. And would you tell me about them?
Well, over the years, I have found that I'm just a bookaholic. I love books because it really bridged children and their learning. Whenever there were difficult concepts or concepts that children wanted to learn, there's always a book that helps to bridge that. And once you use books, you have a common experience. So what I started doing, I started collecting books, and people knew how much I loved books. So I got many gifts as books. Retired teachers would give them to me. Friends would say, you know what, I just cleaned my kid's closet out and I have all these books. Do you want them? Yeah, I'll be right there. So I had 6 filing cabinets full of books. I categorized them by theme because my whole thing was that when a child was really motivated to read and they wanted to read a book and they said, can we read The Very Hungry Caterpillar? I wanted to go put my hands on it right away.
And do you have those books in both Spanish and English?
Yes, yes. Oh. And that was really the beauty of it, was that because I was one of the first dual language teachers in our district, a lot of the people that had those books or found those books or however way, they would gift them to me. And so parents in the community who have those types of books, who can gift them to teachers, that's a wonderful resource. Any other teachers that have them that are not using them, you know, giving to the person that is really going to use them is really important.
That's wonderful. In terms of other content areas, what kinds of concepts should young ELLs be exposed to in preschool?
Well, everything. The themes that we were able to write in our school district centered around social studies or science concepts. For example, everything was built around the word families. There were ocean families, there were foods families eat. All those themes around the word families gave us the ability to teach over time. So using those types of themes to connect learning, to connect literacy, to connect science and social studies and math to those things that we were doing, then you can sing about them, you can draw about them, you can write about those themes. You have rich content around which to talk about.
And what about developing those very early math skills?
Oh, that's another important piece. Of course, math is very important to the development of children's learning. National standards will say that reading and math are top 2 things that children need to be successful in a good quality preschool program to be able to carry that through into their school career.
Would you share a favorite math activity?
Yeah, there were some that we did that were Really important when it came to, I'm trying to think of some that were science and math together. For example, we would look at animals and try to classify what those animals were and by their coverings. And so that was a very important science concept. But then I had the little manipulatives where we would say, okay, here's a set of animals and they have different types of coverings. Some are mammals, some are reptiles, some are amphibians, some are birds, some are fish. Let's look at what these are and let's divide them up into sets. And once we were able to divide them up into sets, we could graph in math how many there were per set. And so not only we were using a science concept to look at the idea of what those animals have to be able to survive in their environment. After that discussion, we were able to graph it, in a big graph on the interactive whiteboard on how many animals they had counted per set.
Tell us about your biome activity.
Well, the biome activities were really great. We studied planted animals in their natural habitat in the spring, and basically what we did, we looked at animals around the world, and the teachers chose different biomes to study. So some of them were the desert, some of them were the tundra, the rainforest, the Arctic, and so we could, in that tundra and Arctic piece, we would able to walk in and you would see white in that classroom. You would see those things that live in the Arctic and what that looked like in that area. If you walked into my classroom, I had the savanna. So they were able to identify some of the savannas that were similar around the world. For example, the ones in Africa or the ones in the plains in the United States. So we wanted to give them a global perspective of language, of it's not just here that we're studying this is around the world. These things exist in patterns around the world. So when you have things that extend themselves in the classroom where they can relate and study them in a variety of ways, it really helps sustain children's language learning, especially when they're second language learners.
How did you assess what your ELLs were learning in other core content areas?
Well, they were all our assessments that were content assessment pieces were totally integrated in whether or not they could draw these things, whether or not they could classify, which is science and math skills, whether or not they could create words in context, whether it was in their native language or their English language learning. So we were doing that language piece there, whether or not they could count and graph or chart. Those were all part of the ongoing assessments that we had for every theme.
What were some of the strategies you used to tell the difference between language difficulty and academic difficulty?
Well, and that's where in my group, my dual language team was very important, because in the assessments that I was able to do, that we did at the end of every theme, if the children were doing very, very well, I could see that because it was all basically quantified by rubric on how the children were doing. So if they had an excellent score, a good score, or a weak score, I was able to pinpoint that weak score over time, whether or not it was a language issue or whether or not it was a cognitive learning issue, by checking with my English teaching partner, because if that child over there in the English was doing very, very well, then it was just the language piece. It wasn't the cognitive piece. So that teamwork, that planning, if there were issues, we would talk to the counselors. So you can always tell as a teacher in that classroom on a day-to-day basis, using your assessments, how those children are faring when it comes to learning.
Well, that's very, very interesting. And how did you use technology to support instruction?
Oh, technology was awesome, because I knew that children are learning in a variety of ways. And as I alluded to previously, interactive whiteboards, computers, using those types of things are very important, as well as the concrete manipulatives that you use every day to make things real and part of your hands-on learning. But using technology is something that these kids are going to be so used to. Now everybody's little, phones and computer-generated games are all in their hands, and those kids are already used to that. So we want to be able to, as a school, stay up with that type of technology. It's difficult when you don't have a lot of funding.
Yeah.
So for me, writing grants, looking for donors in the community, bringing those donors in and saying, look what you've created, look what you've helped sustain in this classroom, was very important too. But using the technology to teach and to take them to the internet and to be able to teach them beginning parts of research was very important as I worked with my 4-year-olds.
I don't want to overlook play and creativity with young children. Why are these such an important part of the curriculum for ELLs?
Well, play is so huge because it gives children the ability to be creative and to be problem solvers and to be able to come up with their own solutions to a variety of things. So setting up the centers very much with the children was huge. Some of the things I left up all year long, like blocks. Blocks are so important to children to be able to play with, to structure. They can learn about balance, they can learn about gravity, pile them up too high and guess what happens? And it's gonna come down. And those questions, why do you think that happened? Why do you think you wouldn't do that again? Or how would you recreate this block structure? How would you make it go higher? So questions that you ask about the children's play is a very important part. You just don't say, okay, kids, it's time to go play and I'll see you in 20 minutes. You know, it's not part of what it is to be an effective teacher, especially when you're developing language for English language learners. You have to be out there questioning, what else do you need? What else can I help you with? What have you done? Can you explain it to the class? Can you draw what you've just created and can you share it with the class? Can we take a picture and write a story and share it with your family? A lot of things that can happen in that play.
How about music and puppets?
Oh, I love them. Of course, that's a great way to learn language because they're learning it authentically. And so lots of CDs, a lot of music, a lot of dance, a lot of movement was very important to me in using that with children. And they would request, can we sing that again? Or can we sing that other one we sang the other day? Can we sing this that we sang, you know, way back when? And so using music every day in a variety of ways is a great way to learn repetition, to learn how to model songs and movement, to be able to find words and pick them out in a story. That's a whole new basis for literacy.
Excellent. Let's take a step back. You've worked very hard to promote national preschool standards and universal preschool during your career. What's inspired your passion in those areas?
I think just knowing that as a young child, I was very in tune to wanting to go to school. I wanted to go to school. And one of the fallacies back then was that if you knew enough English, you didn't have to go to school. You didn't have to go and pre-learn your language ability. And they gave me a step, you know, ahead in wanting to see what a school was. I think they just gave me an incentive. But once I saw what school was, I was just one of those schoolgirls. And I know what we can do when you have positive teachers, positive experiences, but especially for young children, because we have a window of time in that learning when everything is so exploratory, everything's why, but why does that happen? And everything is a wonder in those early childhood years when you see those eyes just sparkle and they're magic, but why did you do that? Or how, oh, look what happened when you did that. Important examples of fun activities where children are learning are so crucial. Let me give you one example. One of them was we were doing a banana experiment where we knew that there was water in the banana, and one of the creations that my co-worker and I did was we rolled that in dry Jello. And if you look at the banana after a few seconds, it starts to really get colorful. And it shows you that the mixture of that water that's in the banana is making that change. And the wonder in kids' eyes when they see, we call it rainbow banana, when they see that rainbow banana come to life was magical. And so that was an impetus for teaching about the rain, the water cycle. And so things like that, that universal preschool programs can do that just give them such a fascination with learning is very important.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome.
That wraps up this segment, but there's still more discussion to come. Please join us for part 3 of this webcast. We'll discuss professional development and mentoring in ELL preschool programs. You can learn more about early literacy for English language learners and watch the other segments of this webcast at www.colorincolorado.org.
Funding for this Colorín Colorado webcast is provided by the American Federation of Teachers, with additional support from the National Council of La Raza.